feelings and you don't know where I've been. I done hit that bottom so many times I ain't going back again. You can reach down with your powers and snipe me with your pen, but you cannot take this fight out of me. That you'll never win. You can go to church on Sunday and confess your mortal sins, but come Monday morning you'll still be back with us again. You'll still have your mighty pen wielded over the heads of us, but no matter how much you prayed in church that day, the goal lies above. And for you, my fine friend, you will lose in the end. Your maker will become the taker and take away your pen. So remember the next line that you write. The life that you harm may not be mine, but the one you need to worry about the most is the soul that you sold for gold. You ain't got no feelings and you don't know where I've been. I done hit that bottom so many times I ain't going back again. You can reach down with your powers and snipe me with your pen, but you cannot take this fight out of me. On that you'll never win.
Howdy folks, Darren Ray Fonso here, talking about labor and industries or workers' comp, and today we're going to be talking about how America's journalists and Washington state journalists are intently failing America's injured workers on our needed minimum federal oversight issue. Yes, tonight's topic is going to be a journalist here from the Northwest, Everett, Washington. He's an Everett Herald reporter named Jerry Kornfeld. He's supposed to be my legislative reporter so that we know what's going on here in Olympia, Washington, here in Snohomish County. Anyways, in 2015, when this report from NPR came out and said it was titled "The Demolition of Workers' Comp in America," basically, and said that Washington State was one of 32 states that are failing our injured workers. And at that same time, Senator Bernie Sanders and Washington State Senator Patty Murray signed a letter to Tom Perez, who was running the Labor Department at that point in 2015, asking them to implement these minimum federal standards to stop a class war on America's injured workers. And at that time, Jerry Kornfeld went on one of our local radio stations, I believe it was KUOW radio station, and said, no, that's not happening here in Washington State. Everything's fine with our work comp systems. There might be a few things we need to fix, but for the most part, everything's fine here in Washington State. Well, it's been 5 years or 6 years almost now since 2015, Mr. Kornfeld, and I have to ask you, if nothing was wrong, as you and Senator Marco Elias told us back then why did the state and state lawmakers like Senator Mike Sells have to go and fight to get us PTSD coverage for first responders and police officers, and also some presumptions for firefighters? And also, why did they have to come up with some presumptions for nurses, which would have helped me back when I was first hurt? I'd also like to know, sir, why it is that also during that time they're talking about allowing us to record our IME doctor's appointments, or maybe all our doctor's appointments, with video and audio tape. These were things that were needing to be done, and that people were being harmed and hurt and not taken care of. And now it's great that we have taken care of the frontline first responders. That is awesome. But what about the butcher, baker, and the candlestick maker, and the carpenters, and the farm workers? And I want to know, sir, why it is you're not helping to get this issue on the table. If you're supposed to be telling us what needs to be done here in the state of Washington and across America as a legislative reporter. So yes, Jerry Kornfield, it's perplexing to me that also during this same time, out at Hanford, they shut down I can't remember the name of it, but it was an IME mill, a doctor mill. They shut it down because one of the doctors confessed that they were harming workers and not helping them. So that got shut down. And then also we had a school diploma mill here that we were sending the injured workers to these fake diploma mills so that they could give them fake diplomas and then cut them off of their benefits. And for 12 years, judges, work comp judges, work comp lawyers, and even the injured workers themselves had cried out to stop that abuse. And it took 12 years for our lawmakers, Jerry Kornfield, to address that issue. And they now have since shut down that fraudulent school. So when you said nothing was happening, nothing's being harmed, people are being harmed and hurt. And you can't go around allowing injured workers to be victimized and then turn around and say, well, don't act like victims. Stop a system that is victimizing people to start with. We need some minimum federal standards like we need a minimum federal wage. We need some basic human rights so that a man in Georgia doesn't get just $35,000 for an amputated arm, and a man in Alabama gets $35,000 for an amputated arm, and a guy in Georgia gets $750,000 for an amputated arm. We need some consistency. If we can have some basic, if we can regulate how spark plugs are made for consistency, then maybe shouldn't how injured workers are compensated for their amputated parts be pretty consistent too? I'm sorry, Jerry. You seem to represent the men with paper on the wall with your pen, where I'm trying to stand up and speak for the men with shovels and hammers that maybe didn't get that paper on the wall and only have GEDs, who are being cheated and fleeced out of some of our vocational services because we have privatized Voc in the state of Washington. And instead of shopping for what color our parachute is or what color their cheese is, basically, they're trying to shop for a reason to deny. So I'm sorry. You need to tell us the truth when people in our community are being harmed. And that's what I'm going to continue to do, is call out those who should be reporting and telling us the truth. And I'm going to make sure I expose those people and hold them to account by the so-called victims that you people, some of you don't want us to call them victims, but I'm sorry, you can't oppress men in our community, rob the fruits of our labor, then allow those men, like some of these doctors in the IME mills, to hide behind state med tort and work comp laws for their crimes against humanity, when the men who stand up and scream out and say this is abusive and oppressive get subjected to criminal law. It becomes oppressive. And now some of our handcuffs may be golden, but handcuffs are handcuffs nonetheless. But I won't get into all that. But I basically am doing is calling out Jerry Kornfield of the Everett Herald, who's supposed to be a legislative reporter, and all the other reporters across America that seem to not want to tell us the truth, like we did have somebody tell us in 2015 in the NPR report was the demolition of workers' comp. So why did we get that truth? Why did Senator Sanders tell us we need this, and Patty Murray? Yet everybody went silent for 5 years. As other people are selling us Med-for-All and 15 an hour and all these other things, everybody lost on, at least for the Democrat side. See, I fight for both Republicans and Democrat injured workers, because once you go through this, you learn the state work comp systems can be equal opportunity oppressors. On the sniff and the grin of, like I say, a doctor in his pen, that frontline HMO gatekeepers are tripping us up instead of helping us. And so we need to talk about that. And it isn't just the fact that patients are being harmed in workers' comp. My wife was injured in her personal care, and the doctor almost killed her, and we could never hold them to account. Med malpractice suits are down 90% from what they were 20 years ago, Mr. Legislative Reporter, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about medical tort laws. We need to talk about allowing doctors to police doctors at the state med boards that seem to condone all this patient abuse and codified state oppression. I'll leave it at that. I wanted to keep it short and sweet. I was just basically asking you, Jerry Kornfield, if everything was so great and we weren't failing our injured workers, why did we have to help all these frontline workers, and why are we not stepping up with minimum federal standards? And here's one more question for you, Jerry Kornfield. If we're doing so beautiful now, and we're doing some great things thanks to folks like Mike Sells fighting for us on the state level here. But what we need is folks like Rick Larson, who I begged for help for now for like 5 years too, to step up and speak up for some minimum federal standards. And I wanted to ask you one more time, if we're doing so beautiful here in the state of Washington, then all of you should not fear some minimum federal standards that might help your brother in Alabama, so that he isn't later used as a tool to make you compete to take more rights away from us. Say maybe if the other side gets in control of our state legislature sometime and says that we're going to take away all this for some because they cost too much. No, we need some basic minimum federal standards put in stone for America's injured workers. And it's egregious when you call yourself a legislative reporter and it's the victims in our community. And I say victims, and I'm sorry you've got this guy that you're reporting on in the Herald, Isaac Herald. No, I think that's his name, Isaac Herald. It's kind of egregious when he says he stands up for firefighters, but he doesn't want to stand up for firefighters across this nation needing some minimum federal standards. So I'm going to make a special video just for Isaac and his calling people victims and saying you shouldn't be a victim because I went through it for 20 years and I got a settlement and I moved on with my life. You don't have no clue. You don't know what the others are going through. And so I'm going to make a video just special for him. And maybe Jerry Kornfeld, you might watch that video. You'll learn something too, bro. Have a good day.
Staying both on the job and healthy may be as vital as ever as a new investigation shows workers' compensation benefits nationwide have been cut. The moves benefit employers and insurance companies that are supposed to cover hurt workers. ProPublica and NPR conducted the joint investigation. The outlets published identical articles Wednesday morning, along with a state-by-state breakdown profiling the cuts over the past 13 years. Here are some of the investigation's key findings. Since 2003, lawmakers in 33 states have passed new laws reducing workers' comp benefits or making them tougher for employees to access. Each state varies significantly on how much you can receive, so where you get hurt matters. Many states cut off benefits after an arbitrary time limit instead of when the worker is recovered, and employers and insurance companies now have more control over medical decisions. The report was especially critical of states like Florida, which has reduced workers' comp benefits by 65% over the past 2 decades. In California, insurers can use the opinions of doctors who never actually saw a patient to reopen old cases and deny medical care. Independent medical reviewers in that state denied the recommendation of workers' doctors in 91% of cases.
Yeah, everyone thinks that workers' comp is so expensive. But in fact, we looked at the numbers and we found that employers are actually paying the lowest cost for workers' compensation insurance since the 1970s. And insurers are doing fairly well too. In 2013, they had an 18% profit, their best year since the 1990s.
In another case highlighted Wednesday morning, ProPublica and NPR pointed out a worker who loses an arm on the job in Alabama is only entitled to a maximum of $48,000 in compensation. Just across the border in Georgia, a worker could get almost $700,000 more over his or her lifetime. ProPublica and NPR say the investigation took up much of the last year for the outlet's 2 reporters, Michael Grable and Howard Burkus. For Newsy, I'm Cliff Judy.
Feelings and you don't know where I've been. I done hit that bottom so many times I ain't going back again. You can reach down with your powers and snipe me with your pen, but you cannot take this fight out of me, that you'll never win. You can go to church on Sunday and confess your mortal sins, but come Monday morning you'll still be back with us again. You'll still have your wielded over the heads of us, but no matter how much you prayed in church that day, the whole rise above. And for you, my fine friend, you will lose in the end. Your maker will become the taker and take away your pen. So remember the next line that you write, the life that you harm may not be mine, but the one you